She was forced to crawl unclothed through the court, until a human picked her up. The chamber of the conquered court was built to make visitors feel small. Its ceiling curved upward like the inside of a planet, dark and distant, threaded with slow-moving lights that marked the passing of legal time. The floor was smooth crystal, cold even through pressure-rated plating. Sound carried too well there. Every movement echoed. Every breath felt recorded. The alien envoy moved slowly across that floor. She was not weak by the standards of her people. She had crossed oceans of stars, survived radiation storms, and negotiated ceasefires between rival clans. But none of that mattered here. In the conquered court, strength was not measured by survival or wisdom. It was measured by submission. Her ceremonial coverings had been removed at the entrance. Not ripped away, not treated as entertainment, but stripped with cold efficiency, as if removing a tool from a crate. To the court, it was not cruelty, it was procedure. The ritual demanded the removal of status, and clothing was considered status. She was ordered to crawl. Her limbs shook as she lowered herself to the crystal floor. The surface was unforgiving, designed to reflect the sky above and the bodies below. Every movement forced her reflection back at her, distorted and helpless. She focused on the ground directly in front of her, refusing to look at the elevated seats where judges and observers watched in silence. Dozens of species filled the tiers. Tall ones, small ones, ones with eyes, ones without. Some breathed air, some vapor, some light. None spoke, none objected. This was not unusual to them. It was how order was kept without war. Her crime, as the court described it, was insufficient deference. Her people had delayed tribute shipments while rerouting resources to stop a planetary famine. In conquered terms, that delay was defiance. Defiance required correction. Each movement forward burned, not from pain alone, but from the knowledge that this ritual would be recorded, archived, and shown to her world as proof. Proof that resistance ended like this. At the edge of the chamber, behind a thin barrier of blue light, stood the human delegation. They were new, officially admitted only 3 cycles earlier, still classified as a developing influence, their voting power limited, their objections carefully monitored. Humanity had been warned repeatedly that the conquered court did not bend for emotion. The human delegate in the front did not look away. He stood still, hands clenched at his sides, eyes fixed on the figure moving across the floor. His species had its own long history of courts, punishments, and public judgment. Humanity knew what humiliation was. They had invented enough forms of it themselves before learning, slowly and painfully, to reject it. The envoy's movement faltered. Her arm slipped slightly on the smooth surface, and for a moment her body sagged. A low tone sounded through the chamber, a warning signal. Continue or force would be applied. The human inhaled sharply. He had been briefed on this ritual. The files called it symbolic. Non-lethal, efficient. They said it prevented rebellions. They said it saved lives in the long run. They never described the silence. They never described the way dignity drained from a living being step by step. A legal advisor beside him whispered urgently, reminding him of the rules. Humanity could not interfere. Interference would be recorded as aggression. Aggression would invite sanctions. Sanctions would cripple Earth's fragile interstellar trade. Millions would suffer. The human heard the words, but his attention stayed on the floor. The envoy lifted her head for the first time. Her eyes met his. They were not pleading. That was the worst part. They were empty of expectation. She did not hope for help. No one ever helped. The ritual had worked for centuries because hope was removed long before the trial began. Something inside the human broke quietly. He did not shout. He did not announce himself. He stepped forward. The barrier light rippled as he passed through. Alarms did not sound immediately. The court systems hesitated, uncertain how to categorize what they were seeing. A junior species had never crossed the ritual boundary before. The sound of his boots on crystal was loud in the silence. Several judges shifted. Their voices rose in sharp, clipped tones, issuing warnings in layered languages. The meaning was clear enough. Stop, withdraw, return to your place. The human did not stop. He reached the envoy just as her strength failed again. Before the warning tone could escalate, he knelt beside her. The cold of the floor seeped through his uniform instantly. Up close, she trembled, not from fear now, but from exhaustion. Her breathing was uneven, controlled only by long discipline. He did not touch her yet. He spoke instead, his voice steady, clear, and carried by the chamber's translation systems. "This ends now." The court erupted. Voices overlapped, judges declaring violations, observers demanding enforcement. Military representatives leaned forward in their seats. Data streams flashed across the air as consequences were calculated in real time. The human removed his diplomatic insignia and placed it on the floor. That action carried weight. It meant he spoke not as a representative of power, but as an individual. The court paused again, confused. Their laws had many categories for defiance, but few for voluntary vulnerability. Only then did he lift her. His movement was careful, respectful. He supported her weight fully, shielding her from the cold floor and the watching eyes. There was no triumph in his posture, no aggression, only refusal. The envoy stiffened in shock. No one had touched her during the ritual except with instruments or force. This contact was different. It was steady, protective, real. The court systems finally reacted. Red warning lights pulsed. A judge declared the ritual compromised. Another argued it was invalidated. A third demanded immediate punishment. The human turned slowly, still holding her. "If your law requires this," he said, "then your law is wrong." The words were simple. That made them dangerous. Security drones hovered closer, weapons charging. The human delegation shouted from behind the barrier, some in fear, some in awe. Earth's legal observers transmitted emergency signals home. The envoy looked at the human's face, close now, and saw something unfamiliar. Choice. The chamber was no longer silent, but for the first time in centuries it was not unanimous. Some observers began to question, quietly, internally. If the ritual could be broken so easily by one act of refusal, what else had they accepted without thought? The judges argued among themselves, their authority shaken not by force, but by a single species that did not understand why cruelty was considered stability. The human did not move again. He simply stood there, holding another being as if that alone was reason enough. And across the conquered court, something ancient began to crack. The conquered court had never prepared for silence like this. Alarms pulsed, warning lights flared, but no one moved to end the moment. The judges spoke over one another, their voices sharp and layered, yet none of them gave the final command. The court was built on certainty. This situation had none. The human stood in the center of the chamber, holding the alien envoy as if the galaxy were not watching. His arms were steady, though his heart raced. He knew the risk now. There was no going back to his seat, no quiet apology that could undo this. Security drones hovered closer, their metal forms reflecting the crystal floor. Their weapons charged but did not fire. The conquered rules demanded authorization for force within the court, and authorization required agreement. Agreement was missing. The envoy's breathing slowly steadied. Her mind struggled to understand what was happening. The ritual should have continued until she reached the final marker. Pain, humiliation, and the loss of her people's standing were all she expected. Instead, she was no longer touching the floor. She looked around from the human's arms. The judges were no longer distant figures of power. Some looked angry, some looked uncertain. One looked away. That single act shook her more than the crawl had. The human shifted his stance slightly, adjusting his grip to keep her comfortable. He did not rush. He did not perform. He simply existed in defiance. A senior judge finally struck the floor with a staff, sending a deep tone through the chamber. The sound forced silence. "This proceeding has been disrupted," the judge declared. "By conquered law, the offending party must be restrained." The drones moved another step closer. The human raised his head. "Before you do that," he said calmly, "you should finish reading your own law." The judge paused. Data flickered across the air. The court's legal system responded automatically, pulling ancient clauses rarely used. One line caught attention. Any ritual requiring continued physical movement must be halted if the subject becomes incapable of completing it by their own power. The judge's eyes narrowed. She was capable, another judge argued quickly. She continued. "Until interference," the senior judge replied. "Interference does not equal incapacity." The human spoke again, his voice even. "She collapsed. I prevented injury." If you claim she was still capable, then you admit the ritual requires suffering beyond function. That violates your own definition of correction. The court fell into argument. Legal minds raced. The conquered had always defined its rituals carefully, just enough to appear controlled, just enough to avoid open cruelty. They had never needed to defend those definitions against a species that treated dignity as non-negotiable. The envoy listened, her head resting lightly against the human's shoulder. she realized something important. They were no longer arguing about her guilt. They were arguing about their system. That had never happened before. Across the chamber, observers whispered among themselves. A few delegates began recording independently, sending feeds to their home worlds. The image of a human standing alone, unarmed, holding another being against the will of an ancient court spread faster than the conquered could suppress it. The senior judge struck the staff again. "The ritual is suspended," the judge announced reluctantly. "Pending review." The words echoed like thunder. Suspended did not mean ended, but it meant stopped. The drones powered down slightly, weapons retracting. The human exhaled for the first time since stepping forward. He lowered his voice and spoke to the envoy directly. "You don't have to crawl anymore?" Her eyes burned, not from pain now, but from something far more dangerous. Relief, she nodded once. The human turned toward the exit. He did not ask permission. He walked. The court shouted. Orders were given. Threats followed. None of it mattered. The law, their own law, bound them now. Any force applied before review would expose the conquered as fraudulent. They watched him leave. Beyond the chamber, the corridors buzzed with chaos. Human officials rushed forward, fear and disbelief written across their faces. Some demanded he stop. Others silently moved aside, letting him pass. Medical teams offered assistance. The envoy refused at first, unwilling to leave the human's arms. When she finally allowed herself to be transferred to a support platform, she kept her eyes on him. "Why?" she asked quietly through the translator. He considered the question. "Because no system is worth that," he said simply. The conquered court went into emergency session. Debates raged for hours. Some demanded punishment to make an example of humanity. Others warned that doing so would confirm every accusation spreading across the networks. Outside, worlds watched. Human broadcasts showed the event unedited. No dramatic music, no speeches. Just footage of a person refusing to accept humiliation as law. Other species began sharing their own memories. Old rituals, quiet injustices, things everyone had agreed not to question. Pressure mounted. Finally, the conquered issued a statement. The ritual would be reviewed. Temporarily suspended across all courts. The envoy's case would be reconsidered under modern ethical alignment. It was careful language, weak language, but it was a crack. The human was summoned back before the court days later, this time under heavy guard. He stood alone again, but the room felt different, less certain, less united. The senior judge addressed him. "You have endangered your species," the judge said. The human nodded. "Yes." "You have challenged traditions older than your civilization." "Yes." "And you would do it again?" The human did not hesitate. "Yes." There was no applause, no cheers, just a quiet understanding spreading through the chamber. The judge looked down at the insignia still resting where it had been placed days earlier. "Humanity's status within the conquered will be reevaluated," the judge said. "You may be dismissed." The human turned to leave. As he did, the envoy stood, not as a subject, as a representative. She faced the court, her posture straight, her voice steady. "My people will remember this," she said, "and so will others." No one stopped her. When the human and the envoy exited together, no one blocked the path. Outside, stars stretched endlessly. The galaxy had not changed. Empires still stood, power still ruled. But something fragile and unstoppable had begun. A story, not of conquest, not of domination, but of refusal. And for the first time, the conquered court feared a species not because of its weapons, but because it would not look away. Across the conquered, discussion turned into argument, and argument turned into division. What had once been treated as a closed system of law now felt unstable. The ritual had not just been paused, it had been questioned in public, and that could not be undone. The human delegate was no longer allowed to walk freely through conquered stations. Escorts followed him everywhere, not openly hostile, but never relaxed. Every door opened a second too late. Every conversation stopped when he entered a room. He accepted it quietly. On Earth, reactions were mixed. Some leaders praised his action, others feared it. Trade partners sent warnings. Military analysts ran simulations that ended badly more often than not. Humanity was still small compared to the great powers of the conquered. But something else was happening too. Messages arrived from unexpected places, minor species, border worlds. Former client states of the conquered. They sent private signals of thanks. They shared records of similar rituals, similar humiliations, endured for generations because resistance always led to erasure. The human read them all. He did not respond to most. He did not promise protection or revolution. He only archived the evidence and sent it to the growing human legal teams working day and night. The alien envoy recovered quickly. Physically, she had never been badly injured. The damage had been something else, and that took longer. Yet each day she stood straighter. Each day she spoke more. She chose to remain on the conquered station instead of returning home. Her presence mattered. She had become a living reminder that the court's authority was not absolute. They met often. Their conversations were quiet, practical, sometimes awkward. They did not speak about heroism. They spoke about systems, about pressure, about how cruelty often survived simply because it was familiar. One cycle later, the Conquered announced a formal review council. It was presented as progress. In truth, it was an attempt to control the damage. The council included representatives from major powers, neutral observers, and for the first time, humanity was given a full seat. The human delegate was not appointed. Instead, Earth sent a team. That worried the Conquered far more. Humans did not shout during the council sessions. They did not accuse, they asked questions. Simple questions. Why must submission be public? Why must status be removed physically? Why does your law assume obedience creates peace? Each question forced explanations that sounded weaker when spoken aloud. The old powers pushed back. They cited history, stability, survival. They warned of chaos if the system changed. Then the envoy spoke. She did not accuse either. She described, calmly, clearly. She described what it felt like to crawl while being watched by a universe that had decided her dignity was negotiable. No drama, no raised voice. That testimony traveled farther than any argument. Other witnesses followed. Not all survived the attention. Some were silenced. Some disappeared. That too was noticed. The Conquered's image cracked further. Protests began on distant worlds, not violent ones, silent ones. Workers refused ritual observances. Client states delayed tributes. Nothing dramatic, but enough to strain the system. The great powers argued among themselves now. The old unity was gone. Behind closed doors, military plans were revised. Not because of human weapons, but because ideas were spreading faster than fleets. The human delegate was called before Earth's leadership. They asked him if he understood what he had started. He answered honestly. Yes. They asked if he regretted it. No. Earth chose its path carefully. They did not threaten war. They did not issue ultimatums. They announced a policy. Humanity would no longer recognize any conquered ruling that required ritual humiliation or symbolic submission. It was a narrow line, but it was firm. Trade suffered at first. Sanctions came and went. Some alliances froze. Others formed quietly. Then something unexpected happened. A major conquered client world declared its withdrawal. They cited no rebellion, no attack, only incompatibility with current ethical standards. The conquered responded with warnings. The world did not back down. It was not protected by human fleets. It did not need to be. The conquered could not enforce its will without revealing what it truly was. More worlds followed, not many at first. Enough. The conquered council stalled. Reviews became permanent discussions. Ritual law was suspended temporarily, again and again, until it became clear that reinstating it would require force. Force now meant exposure. The alien envoy returned to her home world at last. She was welcomed not as a victim, but as a turning point. Her people stood taller because someone else had stood with her when it mattered. Before she left, she met the human one final time. The galaxy will change slowly, she said. Too slowly for some, he nodded. Slow change lasts longer, he replied. Years passed. Humanity did not become an empire. It did not conquer. It did not dominate the conquered. It became something far more unsettling, a reference point. Whenever a new law was proposed, someone asked, would humans accept this? Whenever a ritual was defended, someone asked, why? The conquered still existed. Power still mattered. Cruelty did not vanish, but it had lost its certainty. And that was enough. The story of the court spread across generations, not as legend but as record. A simple moment when a system failed because one person refused to follow it. No weapons fired, no throne fell, just a choice. And in a galaxy built on obedience, that choice proved to be the most dangerous thing humanity ever brought with it. Time did not erase the moment in the court. It changed how people remembered it. Years after the ritual was stopped, the conquered still stood, but it no longer felt eternal. Its chambers were quieter now. Not because fewer beings attended, but because fewer accepted silence as agreement. Questions lingered in the air long after sessions ended. The human who had stepped forward no longer served as a delegate. He had returned to Earth not as a hero, but as a witness. He spoke rarely in public. When he did, he chose careful words. He reminded people that change did not come from one act alone, but from what others decided to do afterward. On the conquered stations, new rules appeared slowly. Words like optional, consensual, and private replaced older phrases tied to ritual correction. Some judges resigned, others adapted. A few resisted openly and were removed by vote, not force. That alone would have been unthinkable before. Not everyone welcomed the shift. Several major powers accused humanity of spreading instability. They claimed old traditions were being erased by outsiders who did not understand the balance that had kept the galaxy from burning. They held emergency councils of their own, planning responses. But those plans never became wars. The reason was simple. Their own populations were watching now. On worlds that had once sent tribute without question, citizens asked why. On planets that had accepted ritual shame as law, elders found fewer young ones willing to kneel. Control became harder to justify when people could point to a clear moment where refusal did not end in destruction. The alien envoy became something unexpected. She was invited to speak across systems, not as a symbol of suffering, but as proof of survival without submission. She did not attack the conquered in her speeches. She described systems, processes, how laws shape behavior when no one questions them. Her calm scared leaders more than anger ever could. Humanity continued its careful path. It did not build vast fleets or claim territory. Instead, it invested in translation, law, and shared infrastructure. Humans became mediators, observers, record keepers. They were present in places where no one else wanted transparency. Some called them weak. Others began calling them necessary. The conquered attempted one final restoration of authority. A proposal was introduced to reinstate ritual correction under a revised name. It was softer on paper, filled with safeguards and oversight. The vote was close. On the day of the decision, the chamber was full. Observers filled every tier, streams broadcast to thousands of worlds. The judges sat rigid, aware that whatever happened next would define the conquered's future. Before the vote, a minor delegate requested the floor. Such requests were usually denied. This one was not. The delegate was from a small species with little influence. They had never spoken during a major session before. Their voice shook as they addressed the chamber. "We followed every rule," they said. "We submitted when told, we crawled when ordered. And still our children were taken, our resources drained, our dignity used as proof of peace." They paused, then added quietly, "If peace requires this, then we choose uncertainty." The vote failed by a narrow margin. The ritual was formally abolished. The conquered did not collapse. It changed, slowly, unevenly, painfully. Some worlds left, others stayed and adapted. New alliances formed, old grudges remained. But the assumption that power required humiliation was gone. On Earth, life continued. The human returned to a quieter role, teaching law and ethics to students who had grown up with the story as history rather than news. They asked him what it felt like to stand alone in that chamber. He always answered the same way. "I wasn't alone," he said. "I just stopped pretending I was." Years later, the alien envoy visited Earth. She walked freely through open cities under skies untouched by ritual towers or court lights. Children passed her without fear. Some recognized her, most did not. She preferred it that way. She and the human walked together along a river, speaking of small things. Weather, travel, the strange comfort of ordinary days. "At the court," she said at last, "I thought I had lost everything." He nodded. "I thought I was about to lose everything too." They stopped at the water's edge. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if you had stayed seated?" He looked at the current, steady and unafraid. "Yes," he said, "that's why I didn't." Far away in the conquered court, new delegates took their seats for the first time. They were younger, more varied, less certain of the old rules. The chamber still echoed. The ceiling still curved high and distant, but the floor no longer waited for anyone to crawl across it. And in that quiet change, the galaxy learned something simple and dangerous. That dignity, once claimed, is very hard to take away again.